The massive circular chamber of the Galactic Council headquarters fell silent as the human delegation entered. Admiral John Reed led his team of 5 across the polished floor, their boots making soft clicks that echoed throughout the vast space. 12 alien representatives watched from their elevated seats, their eyes, or whatever sensory organs they possessed, focused intently on the humans. This was humanity's big moment. After decades of deep space exploration, they had finally been granted an audience with the Galactic Council, the governing body that maintained peace among the 300 most advanced species in the Milky Way. "Welcome, representatives of Earth," announced the council leader, a tall blue-skinned being with 4 arms and a translucent head that pulsed with light as it spoke. "I am High Counselor Mox. The Council acknowledges humanity's request for membership." Admiral Reed stepped forward, shoulders squared. "Thank you, High Counselor. Earth is honored by this opportunity." The Admiral's 4 security officers stood at attention behind him. Each wore the dark blue uniform of the Earth Space Force and carried a standard-issue magnetic pulse rifle, the most advanced firearms humanity had developed. The weapons were holstered at their sides, visible but non-threatening. A rumble of murmurs spread through the council chamber. One of the delegates, a reptilian creature with scales that shifted colors like oil on water, leaned forward. "Are those projectile weapons your guards carry?" The alien asked, its translator device giving its words a metallic edge. Reed nodded. "Yes, Counselor. Standard equipment for our security forces." The chamber erupted in what could only be described as laughter, a mix of clicks, whistles, and vibrations from various species. "You still use physical projectiles?" asked another delegate, this one resembling something between an insect and a plant. "Fascinating. Most species abandon such technologies shortly after achieving space travel." Reed felt his face grow warm. "Our firearms are highly advanced. They use electromagnetic acceleration too." Yes," interrupted High Counselor Mox, waving 2 of his 4 hands dismissively. "Quite primitive by galactic standards. The Council abandoned such weapons 10,000 years ago." The human security team exchanged uncomfortable glances. Captain Lisa Gray, Reed's second-in-command, kept her expression neutral despite the clear insult. "Perhaps," Reed said carefully, "you could explain the preferred defense technologies used by council members." Mox gestured to a small orb floating near his seat. The device projected a holographic display showing sleek, handheld devices that emitted beams of energy. "Neural disruptors, gravity pulse emitters, nanite clouds. These are the tools of modern galactic security," Mox explained. "Clean, precise, and without the barbaric physical damage caused by your bullets." One of the security officers, Lieutenant Mike Torres, shifted uncomfortably. Reed shot him a warning glance. "We appreciate the information," Reed said diplomatically. "Earth is always eager to advance our technologies." "Indeed," said the reptilian counselor. "That is why we invited your species here. You show potential, despite your current limitations." The meeting continued with discussions of trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and the complex laws that governed interstellar relations. Throughout it all, Reed noticed how the alien delegates kept glancing at the human weapons with mixtures of amusement and disgust. As the formal meeting concluded, Captain Gray leaned close to Reed's ear. "They think our guns are toys," she whispered. Reed nodded slightly. "Let them think what they want. Sometimes being underestimated is an advantage." What the Council didn't understand was that humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of ballistic warfare. While other species had abandoned physical projectiles for energy weapons, humanity had continued refining what worked, making their primitive technology increasingly deadly and reliable. As the human delegation departed, High Counselor Mox watched them with his pulsing, luminous head. "Such an interesting species," he said to his colleagues. "So backward yet so confident." Little did the Council know that humanity's outdated weapons would soon prove far more valuable than anyone could have imagined. 3 days after their initial meeting, Admiral Reed and his team stood once again in the Grand Council chamber. The atmosphere felt different today, less curious and more dismissive. Reed had spent the intervening time studying the Council's technology and culture, hoping to find common ground despite their technological differences. The Council has reviewed Earth's application for membership, High Counselor Mox announced, his translucent head glowing a cool blue. We have reached our decision. The 12 delegates sat straighter in their seats. Captain Gray stood at Reed's side, her face carefully blank despite the tension in her shoulders. Earth's application for full membership is denied, Mox stated flatly. Reed had expected this, but the words still stung. May I ask on what grounds, High Counselor? The reptilian counselor, who Reed had learned was called Trix, leaned forward. Your technological development is inadequate, particularly your defensive capabilities. We have reviewed your military history, added another delegate, a being composed of what looked like shifting smoke contained within a crystalline exoskeleton. Your species relies far too heavily on kinetic force. It's barbaric. Reed maintained his diplomatic composure. With respect, counselors, our weapons may be different from yours, but they are effective for our needs. This prompted another round of the strange alien laughter that had embarrassed the humans during their first meeting. Effective. Trix's scales flashed red and gold in apparent amusement. Your projectile weapons would be useless against modern shielding technology. Even the weakest personal shields used by council races can deflect physical objects. To demonstrate, the smoky delegate activated a small device on its crystalline arm. A faint shimmer appeared around its body. Fire your weapon at me, it challenged. I assure you, I will remain unharmed. Lieutenant Torres looked at Reed, who shook his head firmly. We don't fire weapons in diplomatic settings, Reed replied coolly. Wise choice, Mox said, though it would have merely demonstrated our point. Your bullets would bounce off Counselor Zeb's shield like raindrops off glass. The council members murmured in agreement, some making gestures that the humans' translators identified as expressions of pity or condescension. However, Mox continued, the council has voted to grant Earth observer status. You may establish a small embassy on Station 7 and continue cultural exchange. Perhaps in a century or two, your species will advance sufficiently for reconsideration. Reed bowed slightly. We appreciate the opportunity, High Counselor. As the formal meeting concluded, the human delegation was approached by one of the junior council assistants, a small four-armed being with pale green skin. I apologize for the council's directness, the assistant said quietly. They are not accustomed to dealing with emerging species. No offense taken, Reed replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. The assistant glanced around nervously. I should mention, the council is currently facing some difficulties. Nothing serious, but there have been reports of unknown ships appearing at the edges of council space. What kind of ships? Captain Gray asked. Nobody knows. They appear briefly and then vanish. The council military assures us there's nothing to worry about. The assistant's upper arms made a gesture similar to a human shrug. Just thought you should know, since you'll be establishing an embassy. Reed thanked the assistant for the information. As the human delegation headed back to their ship, Lieutenant Torres finally spoke up. So that's it. We're just second-class citizens now. For the moment, Reed replied. But something doesn't feel right. That assistant was nervous about those mystery ships. Captain Gray nodded thoughtfully. And did you notice how quickly they dismissed our weapons, almost like they were trying to convince themselves? Back on their ship, Reed called an immediate meeting with his team. On the main screen, he pulled up the scans they had secretly taken of the Council's defensive systems. They think their shields make them invincible, Reed said, pointing to the energy patterns. But every shield has a weakness, and I think our primitive weapons might just exploit theirs. Lieutenant Torres grinned. So we let them keep underestimating us. Exactly, Reed replied. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most unexpected. And in combat, The unexpected wins. As their ship departed from Council space, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they would be returning sooner than the Council anticipated. 2 months after Earth's delegation established their small embassy on Station 7, the emergency alarms blared throughout the massive space station. Admiral Reed was reviewing defense protocols with Captain Gray when the station's lighting shifted to a deep purple, a color the humans had learned indicated the highest level of alert. "What's happening?" Reed asked the embassy's alien liaison, a junior council member named Kel. Kel's skin paled from its usual orange to a sickly yellow. "Unknown vessels have entered Council space. Not just scouts this time. A full fleet." The station's main communication system activated, projecting a massive holographic display in every public area. High Counselor Mox appeared, his translucent head pulsing with rapid flashes of red and white. "Attention all Council citizens and allies," Mox announced, his usual condescending tone replaced by something Reed had never heard from him before. "Fear. We are facing an incursion by a previously unknown species calling themselves the Drax. Multiple Council worlds are under attack. All military vessels are ordered to defensive positions." Reed exchanged glances with Captain Gray. "Can we get access to tactical data?" he asked Kel. The alien hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me to the command center. As observers, you're not supposed to have this level of access, but circumstances are unusual." In the station's command center, chaos reigned. Aliens of various species rushed between workstations, their usual calm efficiency replaced by barely controlled panic. The main tactical display showed red markers spreading across Council space like a virus. "The Drax ships appeared simultaneously at 12 locations," explained a military officer, a tall insectoid being with compound eyes that reflected the emergency lights. "They're using some kind of technology that bypasses our early warning systems." Reed studied the display. "What about your defensive response?" The officer clicked his mandibles in frustration. "Ineffective. Our energy weapons barely dent their shields. It's like they've specifically designed defenses against our technology." Another alarm sounded, and a new message appeared on the display. Reed didn't need a translation to understand its meaning. Another Council world had fallen. "This is Outpost Zenith," came a desperate voice over the communications system. "Their ships have broken through our orbital defenses. Our weapons have no effect. They've landed ground forces and—" The transmission cut to static. The command center fell silent for a moment before erupting into even greater chaos. "Show me the Drax ships," Reed demanded. The display zoomed in on one of the enemy vessels, a dark, angular craft bristling with what looked like sensor arrays. Reed pointed to specific areas of the ship. "Those are shield generators, right? And these are their weapon emplacements." The insectoid officer nodded. "Yes, but as I said, our weapons can't penetrate their defenses." Reed turned to Captain Gray. "Notice anything interesting about their design?" Gray studied the image, her eyes narrowing. "No impact armor," she said quietly. "Their hulls are built to deflect and absorb energy weapons, but there's minimal physical protection. They're not expecting to be hit by anything solid." Reed nodded. "Exactly. They've adapted to counter the Council's preferred warfare methods, but not ours." He turned to the Council officers who were now watching the humans with curiosity. "Your weapons fire energy beams, correct? Pure energy that their shields can disperse or reflect." "Of course," responded the insectoid officer. "All advanced civilizations use energy-based weapons. Physical projectiles are primitive." "Yes, we've heard," Reed interrupted. "But that might be exactly what you need right now." He pulled up the schematics of Earth's newest battleships on his personal device and displayed them. "Our main weapons are electromagnetic railguns firing tungsten projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. Pure kinetic energy. No shield can disperse mass. It has to physically stop it." The Council officers stared at the schematics in confusion, then growing interest. "Are you suggesting?" Kel began. "I'm suggesting," Reed said firmly, "that the Council request immediate military aid from Earth. Our primitive weapons might be your only chance against an enemy that's specifically prepared to counter your advanced technology. High Counselor Mox, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. His head pulsed with slow, thoughtful patterns of light. "Pride has no place in survival," he said quietly. "Admiral Reed, how quickly can your ships reach Council space?" The Earth War Room buzzed with activity as Admiral Reed's transmission played on the main screen. President William Morgan leaned forward in his chair, surrounded by his military advisors and scientific experts. The images of the alien Drax ships hung in the air as three-dimensional holograms, slowly rotating to reveal every angle. "Let me be clear, Mr. President," Reed's voice came through the quantum communication link. "The Council is facing complete defeat. 3 major worlds have already fallen. Their weapons are useless against these Drax invaders. And you believe our weapons would be effective?" the President asked, his weathered face showing deep concentration. "I do," Reed replied firmly. "The Drax have optimized their defenses against energy weapons. They have virtually no protection against kinetic impacts." General Laura Martinez, head of Earth's Defense Forces, stepped forward. "Show me their whole composition again." The hologram zoomed in, displaying the molecular structure of the Drax ships. Dr. Tom Wilson, Earth's leading xenotechnology expert, manipulated the display with quick hand gestures. "Fascinating," he muttered. "Their outer layer is a complex energy-absorbing material. It captures and redirects beam weapons, even high-intensity plasma. But look here," he pointed to the structural elements. "The physical properties are relatively brittle. A concentrated physical impact would crack it like an eggshell." General Martinez nodded slowly. "They've evolved to fight an enemy that only uses energy weapons. They've forgotten about good old-fashioned bullets and bombs." "Not just bullets," Captain Jennifer Lee chimed in from the Weapons Division. "Our newest rail guns can accelerate a 20-kilogram tungsten rod to 15% of light speed. At that velocity, the kinetic energy would be equivalent to a small nuclear blast, but focused on a point the size of my thumb." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. "The Drax won't be expecting physical projectiles," Dr. Wilson added. "In their experience, advanced civilizations abandon kinetic weapons because energy weapons are cleaner and more precise. They've optimized for the wrong threat." President Morgan turned to General Martinez. "How quickly can we deploy?" "The first fleet can be ready in 48 hours. 6 battleships, each carrying 20 railguns, and over 100 fighter craft armed with conventional missiles." The President nodded, then addressed the room. "What we're discussing is the first human military intervention in galactic affairs. The implications are enormous." Admiral Reed's voice came through again. "Mr. President, the Council is formally requesting Earth's military assistance. They're offering full membership and trade rights in exchange." A small smile crossed General Martinez's face. "Funny how quickly their opinion of our primitive weapons has changed." "This isn't about proving a point," the President cautioned. "This is about protecting innocent lives, alien and potentially human. If these Drax conquer the Council, Earth would likely be next." He stood up, a decision made. "Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. But I want our advantages kept secret until the moment of engagement. Admiral Reed, tell the Council we're sending help, but keep the details of our weapons classified." "Yes, Mr. President," Reed replied. As the meeting adjourned, Captain Lee approached Dr. Wilson with a tablet displaying more detailed scans of the Drax ships. "Look at these engine configurations," she said quietly. "They're using some kind of gravity manipulation for propulsion." Wilson studied the data. "That's why our sensors didn't recognize them at first. But this actually works in our favor. Their propulsion system creates gravitational distortions that our ballistic targeting systems can track with perfect accuracy. So we can hit them, and when we do, they'll shatter," Lee concluded. "Precisely." Wilson smiled grimly. "They've never encountered a species that held on to outdated technology like ours. Sometimes, The old ways are the best ways. Across the room, President Morgan stood alone, staring at the holographic display of the galaxy. Humanity was about to enter galactic warfare with what the Council considered antique weapons. But sometimes, being technologically behind in one area meant thinking differently, and that different thinking might just save the galaxy. Commander Alex Miller stood on the bridge of the EDF Resolute, Earth's flagship, as it dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Arcturus system. 5 other human battleships emerged alongside it, their massive hulls gleaming in the light of the distant star. This system was home to one of the Council's major shipyards, now under siege by the Drax fleet. Status report, Miller ordered, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. All ships reporting ready, Commander, replied Lieutenant Frank Cooper from the weapons station. Rail guns charged and loaded. Point defense systems active. The tactical officer, Major Helen Davis, looked up from her console. I'm detecting 37 Drax vessels surrounding the shipyard. Council ships are in defensive formation, but they're taking heavy losses. Miller nodded grimly. Any sign they've detected us? Negative. Our approach was masked by the gas giant's magnetic field, just as planned. The communication screen flickered, and Admiral Reed's face appeared. He was stationed on the Council's command carrier along with High Counselor Mox and several other alien officials. Commander Miller, the Council forces will continue to engage the Drax from their current position, Reed said. They don't believe your ships will be effective, but they've agreed to let you attempt your attack plan. In the background, Miller could see the alien counselors watching with what looked like skepticism, though it was hard to read their expressions. Understood, Admiral. We'll show them what kinetic weapons can do. Miller turned to his crew. Battle stations. Deploy according to Plan Alpha. The human fleet split into 3 groups, using the debris of destroyed ships as cover while they maneuvered into position. On the Resolute's main screen, Miller watched as the Drax ships hammered the Council's defenses with energy weapons that seemed to cut through their shields like they weren't even there. They've completely adapted to counter the Council's technology, Major Davis observed. Their weapons' frequencies perfectly match the resonance gaps in Council shields. Miller nodded. And that's why they won't be ready for us. All ships, prepare to fire on my mark. The human vessels aligned their main guns, each targeting a different Drax ship. The rail guns, massive electromagnetic accelerators running the length of each battleship, hummed with building power. Rail guns at full charge, Lieutenant Cooper reported. Targeting solutions locked. Miller took a deep breath. Fire. 6 tungsten rods, each weighing 20 kilograms and moving at 15% of light speed, streaked across space. There was no beam, no flash of energy, just solid projectiles moving faster than the eye could follow. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The first Drax ship hit directly in its command section, simply shattered. Its energy shields, designed to absorb and deflect beams, did absolutely nothing against the solid mass moving at relativistic speed. 5 other Drax vessels met similar fates, breaking apart in spectacular explosions. On the Council command carrier, the alien officials stared in shocked silence. What just happened? High Counselor Mox asked, his translucent head pulsing with confused patterns. Admiral Reed allowed himself a small smile. Kinetic energy, Counselor. No shield can ignore Newton's laws of motion. Back on the Resolute, Miller was already coordinating the next volley. All ships, reload and retarget. Fighter squadrons, launch now. From the human battleships poured dozens of smaller craft, each armed with conventional missiles carrying solid warheads. The remaining Drax ships attempted to respond, turning their weapons toward the new threat. Energy beams lanced out, but the human vessels had already anticipated this. Their hulls, designed with lessons learned from studying Drax technology, incorporated reflective materials that scattered the energy beams. Second volley ready, Cooper announced. Fire at will, Miller ordered. Another 6 relativistic projectiles tore through space, each finding its mark with devastating precision. More Drax ships shattered, unable to withstand the pure kinetic force. The Council ships, seeing the effectiveness of the human attack, began to rally. Their commanders quickly adapted, positioning their vessels to herd the Drax into the path of the human weapons. On the tactical display, Major Davis watched as the Drax formation began to break. "They're retreating, Commander. Their remaining ships are attempting to reach FTL jump points." Miller nodded. "Don't let them escape. I want the galaxy to know what happens when you face human weapons." As the battle continued, the Council officials watched in amazement as humanity's primitive technology turned the tide of a war they had been losing badly. High Counselor Mox turned to Admiral Reed, his head glowing with a new pattern. "It seems," Mox said quietly, "that we have much to learn from Earth after all." The observation deck of the Council flagship fell silent as the main viewscreen displayed the aftermath of battle. Debris from destroyed Drax ships drifted through space, illuminated by the distant Arcturus star. What had begun as a desperate last stand had transformed into a decisive victory for the combined Council human forces. High Counselor Mox stood motionless, his translucent head cycling through colors of astonishment. Beside him, Admiral Reed maintained a professional demeanor, though a hint of satisfaction showed in his eyes. "Impossible," muttered Counselor Trix, scales shifting to a deep blue of shock. "Their ships simply shattered." "Not impossible," Reed replied calmly. "Just basic physics. Force equals mass times acceleration. No shield, no matter how advanced, can ignore that equation." Commander Miller's face appeared on the communication screen. "Admiral, all enemy ships have been neutralized or have retreated. We're conducting rescue operations for damaged Council vessels." Reed nodded. "Excellent work, Commander." Mox finally turned toward Reed, his head settling into a steady purple glow. "I must understand how this worked. Our best scientists claimed physical projectiles were obsolete. Perhaps a demonstration would help," Reed suggested. 20 minutes later, the Council representatives gathered in one of the flagship's testing chambers. Lieutenant Cooper had brought over a simple display: a standard-issue human sidearm, a small energy shield generator borrowed from Council security, and a metal target. "This shield," Cooper explained, "is rated to stop your standard energy weapons." He activated the device, creating a shimmering field in front of the target. "Watch what happens when I fire an energy pistol at it." He borrowed a Council weapon and fired. The energy beam struck the shield and dissipated harmlessly, exactly as expected. "Now, my primitive human weapon." Cooper drew his sidearm, took aim, and fired. The bullet passed through the shield as if it weren't there and embedded itself in the metal target with a loud ping. The Council members flinched at the sound. Most had never heard a gunshot before. "Your shields," Cooper explained, "are designed to interact with energy. They create fields that absorb, redirect, or neutralize energy attacks. But a physical bullet, it's just mass in motion. The shield has no mechanism to stop it." "But our civilization abandoned physical weapons millennia ago," protested a mollusk-like counselor. "We determined energy weapons were more advanced." Reed stepped forward. "More advanced doesn't always mean more effective. Your civilizations all followed the same technological path, developing better and better energy weapons, while simultaneously developing better defenses against those same weapons." Meanwhile, Miller added, joining the demonstration, "Humanity continued refining kinetic weapons alongside energy technology. We never abandoned what worked just because something newer came along." The insectoid military officer, who had initially dismissed human weapons, now studied the bullet hole with fascination. "The Drax must have followed our same technological path. They designed their ships specifically to counter our energy weapons, but had no defenses against good old-fashioned bullets and shells," Miller finished. "Scaled up to our rail guns, of course." High Counselor Mox approached the target, running a three-fingered hand over the bullet hole. "All this time, we thought we were showing you the future of warfare. when in fact, you had preserved something we had foolishly abandoned. Reed nodded. Different perspectives lead to different solutions. That's why diversity of thought is valuable, especially in a galactic council. The demonstration continued as human officers explained the various kinetic weapon systems that had turned the tide of battle. Rail guns accelerating projectiles to relativistic speeds, missile systems delivering physical payloads, even the simple but effective ballistic weapons carried by human marines. And these weapons, these guns, they require no exotic materials. Asked Trix, now genuinely curious. Just metal, propellant, and good engineering, Cooper replied. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable. As the council members discussed among themselves, Admiral Reed stepped aside with Commander Miller. "This changes everything," Miller said quietly. "They won't look at us the same way again." Reed nodded. "This was never about proving ourselves superior. It was about proving we're different, and that different perspectives have value." On the other side of the room, High Counselor Mox was already discussing plans to integrate human kinetic weapon designs into Council defense systems. The age of looking down on primitive human technology had ended in a single battle. Sometimes, Reed thought, you had to fire a gun to make yourself heard. 1 month after the Battle of Arcturus, the Grand Council chamber looked very different. Where once 12 species had sat in judgment, now 13 delegates occupied the curved table. The human representative, Admiral Reed, sat in a newly created position, his uniform adorned with both Earth and Council insignia. High Counselor Mox called the session to order, his translucent head glowing with formal golden light. "This special gathering of the Galactic Council will now begin. Our first order of business, formally recognizing Earth as a full council member." The chamber, once filled with dismissive whispers about human technology, now hummed with respectful attention. Representatives from over 300 worlds watched as Mox presented Reed with the Council seal. "In recognition of Earth's crucial role in defeating the Drax threat, and in acknowledgement of humanity's unique contributions to galactic security, we welcome Earth as the 13th founding species of the new Galactic Council." Reed accepted the seal with a formal bow. "On behalf of Earth and all humans, I thank the Council for this honor. We look forward to sharing our perspectives and our technologies with our galactic neighbors." The formal ceremony concluded, and the Council moved to more practical matters. The main display activated, showing a new class of Council defense vessels under construction. Their designs clearly incorporated elements of human engineering, most notably large rail gun emplacements alongside traditional energy weapons. The first joint Human Council battleships will be operational within 6 months, reported the military officer, the same insectoid who had once dismissed human weapons as primitive. "We're calling them Guardian-class vessels. They combine the best of both our technologies." Commander Miller, now promoted to the Council's Joint Defense Committee, stood to explain. The Drax threat exposed a critical vulnerability in Council defense strategy. By focusing exclusively on energy weapons and defenses, you created a blind spot that the Drax exploited. He gestured to the ship schematics. "These new vessels correct that weakness. Energy weapons for precision, kinetic weapons for raw power, shields against energy attacks, physical armor against kinetic ones." Counselor Trix, whose scales now shimmered with colors of approval, leaned forward. "The Drax have retreated beyond the outer rim, but our intelligence suggests they're rebuilding. When they return, they'll find a very different council waiting for them." Reed nodded. "And they'll face weapons they never expected. The combined fleet will be ready." As the meeting progressed, Reed reflected on how quickly things had changed. Just months ago, the Council had laughed at human firearms. Now, Council security forces were training with modified human weapons, and Council shipyards were building massive rail guns based on Earth designs. After the session concluded, Reed found himself on an observation deck with High Counselor Mox, looking out at the stars. "I must confess something, Admiral," Mox said, his voice softer than usual. Our dismissal of your technology wasn't just about believing our ways were superior. Oh, Reed raised an eyebrow. It was fear, Mox continued. Not of your weapons themselves, but of what they represented. A completely different path of development, one we had abandoned so long ago we'd forgotten its potential. Reed nodded slowly. Different doesn't mean inferior. Sometimes it just means different. A lesson the Council needed to learn, Mox agreed. For 10,000 years, we believed technological progress moved in a single direction. You showed us otherwise. Below them, in the station's docking bay, a group of Council soldiers was receiving training from human Marines. The distinctive crack of ballistic weapons echoed faintly through the station, a sound that would have been unthinkable in Council space just weeks earlier. Your people have a saying, Mox observed. Something about teaching old dogs. Reed smiled. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. But it seems that doesn't apply to the Council. Perhaps Mox's head pulsed with what Reed had come to recognize as amusement. It just took the right teacher, and a very convincing demonstration. As they watched a Council military transport dock, its hull newly retrofitted with kinetic weapon emplacements, Reed felt a sense of pride. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not by abandoning its past, but by honoring it, by remembering that sometimes the old ways remained effective precisely because everyone else had forgotten them. And when faced with an enemy who had countered all advanced weapons, it had taken humanity's supposedly primitive guns to save the galaxy.